Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's edition of The Issues with me, Harry Boota. Each week I have the honour and privilege to interview politicians, public figures and personalities, distinguished personalities at that, who have either direct or indirect influence on people's lives. I will be asking them questions on the issues which affect your lives, be they local or community issues, national or international. This week I am delighted to have with us Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. Let me extend a very warm welcome to you, Councillor Iqbal. Welcome to The Issues.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Mr. Boota.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Iqbal, you are the leader of Labour Council, a Labour group in Pendle Council, and County Councillor for Brighfield and Nelson North. I believe you are also the portfolio holder for economic development and communication. Councillor Iqbal, please tell us a little bit, before we lead you into the difficult questions, which I hope you will answer succinctly, please tell us a little bit about your background, your roots and your education. Was your family involved in politics before you, and what brought you into politics?
First of all, alhamdulillah, my father came to this country in 1956 and worked in the factories. He came as an economic migrant from Pakistan. Originally, my family are from Mirpur in Azad, Kashmir. I was born in this country, born in Bury, which is near Manchester. Went to school, local schools here in Nelson, went to college here in Nelson. But I got interested in politics when I was at college because whilst I was at school, I was one of the Margaret Thatcher school children. And I still remember to this day where the roofs were leaking in school. So the politics in me came out when I was at primary school, but really came to the fore when I was at college, where I joined the Students' Union, got involved in local politics. I made my decision to join a local political party here in Pendle. And alhamdulillah, I was first elected to the council back in 1998, which is 22 years ago now.
MashaAllah.
I then proceeded to be elected to the County Council at Lancashire in 2009. And alhamdulillah, I've been blessed to be leader of the council here in Pendle since 2015. And that brings with itself many challenges because you're right, here I am leading a council who's making decisions on behalf of people's daily lives, what affects them on a daily basis. And it's a difficult choice at the moment, especially with COVID-19. But alhamdulillah, I'm blessed. I've got a wonderful family around me. I've got wonderful brothers and sisters and a fantastic community who have put me in this position. And I will never forget who put me into this position through the hard work that those people put in. Some of them are no longer with us. Some still are. And I always look to the community for advice and guidance at all times.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Excellent. You mentioned that your father came in 1956 and I was born in 1956. So that's a long time ago. Well, welcome to you, and many congratulations for your previous political upbringing to where you are now, and it's a pleasure to have you with us to answer some very difficult questions that I will be posing to you. But let me say, you're currently the leader of a joint administration with the Lib Dems. Considering the Lib Dems are seen as being a party who sold out their voters in the coalition with the Tory party in 2010, why did you decide to join forces with the Lib Dems?
Well, locally, in terms of the politics, I mean, Pendle is a unique place. The political control doesn't really swing between the two main parties, Labour and the Conservatives. I've been leader of the Labour group since 2006. The Liberal Democrats are on a local level are the smallest party, but they ultimately have the balance of power. So between 2013 to 2015, they were in coalition with the Conservatives locally. That relationship broke down mainly because the local Conservative leadership at the time felt that they didn't need any other party support. In 2015, after the elections, the council was still hung. And my view was that the council cannot operate on a hung basis. It needs clear leadership. So I reached out to both political parties and said, look, if you want to work with me, I'm more than happy to be a consensual politician and work together for the betterment of the people. But clearly,
but that doesn't provide clear leadership, does it? When you're in coalition.
Well, I would disagree. I mean, it does. I mean, I'm leader of the council. My deputy leader is the leader of the Liberal Democrat group. But we are quite clear. We have a 30-point agreement between us which are our red lines, what are their red lines, and our joint objectives. And
but once you start drawing red lines, that's where things start to fall apart, because you have to sort of pacify one side or the other side, and that can't always work. Coalition is not the way to run a government, to run a council.
Yeah, I mean, politics,
and that's where the problems that you have within your council. I think that could they stem back to the point that you are in coalition with the Lib Dems.
Yeah, well, I would disagree. I mean, I've been leader of a joint administration for 5 years now, and alhamdulillah, over the last 5 years, we've not had any occasion to fall out whatsoever. Because I believe that sometimes you have to be pragmatic rather than being entrenched in our positions. Sometimes politics is about giving and taking, but so long as your focus is the community, I believe you can achieve things. And alhamdulillah, over the last 5 years as leader, we've achieved a lot in Pendle.
Well,
but there's more to be done.
Let's talk about achieving things. Comments have been made that in Pendle, the response by local authorities was extremely slow and unorganised when responding to COVID-19. Either residents of Pendle did not get sufficient communication about testing and the changing rules on restrictions in this area. What do you say to in response to these comments?
Well, I would disagree, and it's on record that people of opposition parties on a national level have recognised that we have been at the forefront of COVID-19. I mean, the issues around testing and the messaging is down to national government. My job as leader of this council is to convey what messages we get from government onto a local level. And I'll give you an example in terms of testing that, we have in certain parts of Pendle a high instance of positivity rates of COVID-19. We've got testing centres, but last week the government unilaterally, without consulting me as leader, decided that because there was a shortage of swab facilities nationally, that we were not able to allow people to walk in. But it's been recognised that this council is at the forefront of tackling the COVID-19 crisis. Hence, other boroughs talk to me to learn how to do things, and alhamdulillah, I'm more than happy to pass on my knowledge.
Well, you always go back to the government. You've as a leader and as a council, responsibility ultimately comes down to you at local level. And when you're in charge of the council, you have to preempt things yourself, right? You cannot. Government advises, and ultimately it's down to you to bring it down to the people and communicate things down to the people.
Well, I would disagree. Government don't actually advise. Government provide the funding to local authorities to deliver services. And now if you look over the last 10 years, in terms of the cuts that this council has had, we've had to face a real stark choice in providing services where people have been used to. So I disagree with your point that, ultimately the buck stops with me. The buck stops with those people that provide the funding. And if the council and the local people don't get the funding for the services, that's not the council's responsibility. That's down to national government not allocating the resources. And over the last 10 years, over this Conservative government, this area has suffered significantly in terms of cuts. Let me just give you an example that if your household budget is £100 a week, and all of a sudden I come along as the Prime Minister or the Chancellor and say, well, from next week you have to survive on £30 a week, you're going to have to make some choices, some stark choices. But ultimately, the buck stops with government. It's my job to provide the services.
But with all due respect, may I sort of take you on that point where that you always come back to the government funding and cuts. Does the cuts only affect Labour-controlled councils? Does it not affect Conservative-controlled councils? Because they seem to do very well on the same kind of funding as it's a level funding field across the country. What one council gets, what the other council gets.
It's not actually. If you check statistically, Conservative, Labour-led councils statistically suffer disproportionately from funding from the Conservative government. And that's a fact. That's in the House of Commons library. It's in the statistics. In terms of Conservative-held areas, I mean, clearly they will get funding. I mean, if you look at some of the southern counties, disproportionately places like Surrey, who are affluent areas, have received more funding under this government than Lancashire County Council, that has a lot of deprived areas. And it's a fact. I'm not making things up here. People can check their own statistics. But the fact is that those areas that are in deprivation have suffered disproportionately under this government.
But is it not?
Why is it that in 2020 in Pendle there is roughly 3,000 children living in poverty? That's not the council's responsibility. That's down to government not providing the funding to those families for their children to have a proper upbringing like you or I would have done.
Well, go back historically. Let's go back the education side of things. People have always managed to get children educated, and every time something fails, you blame the government. That the children are in poverty, you blame the government. Is it not down to local level, the mismanagement of economy at local level that affects schooling and local services?
No, it doesn't, because the education sector, for example, I'm chairman of Pendle Vale College here in Nelson, the largest school in the borough. The school gets funding directly from the government via the county council. We've suffered significant cuts over the last 10 years.
Per pupil funding is the same across the country, am I wrong?
It's not. No, you're wrong there. Per pupil funding isn't the same across the country. In fact, there's schemes such as Pupil Premium that should be directed at those areas where there's deprivation. And education, why is it that in state schools we suffer disproportionately compared to private sector schools, private schools, where it just so happens a lot of the elite send their children?
Have you asked that question? Why didn't you ask that question?
Well, I constantly lobby. I mean, why is it that the Prime Minister and his friends, his cronies as I would call them, are having elite education when children that I represent in this borough have to make do? And I was one of those children under Margaret Thatcher who was suffering with leaking roofs. That wasn't down to the council, that was down to the government. And it's a fact.
Well, I got educated in this country from 1967 up to 1973, 72, okay? To say that we suffer disproportionately, I joined the armed forces. I went, after learning ABC from the age of 12 to 17, I joined the armed forces. I was in the Royal Navy for 23 years. Now, we can keep on blaming and blaming and blaming all the time. It doesn't ultimately come down to personal responsibility, parental responsibilities to educate children. Government only provides resources.
Yeah, government needs
what you deliver at the end of it with those resources comes down to local levels.
Absolutely, I agree with you entirely. But government needs to provide fair funding resources, not say to certain parts of the country, here's a penny, when in some parts they will give a pound. But it's down to parental responsibility. I agree with you. But if those parents are coming from a socio-economic background that is deprived in the first place, what start are they giving to their children when they're struggling to put food on the table? And if you look at this current crisis in terms of COVID-19, the government, for example, 2-3 weeks ago, after weeks of lobbying from council leaders like myself across the country, introduced a scheme that they said if somebody sadly tests positive for COVID-19, that they expect them to survive on £13 a day. Well, I'd like to see Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock survive on £13 a day. That's not fair.
Well, I think I had a question on that lined up for you later on, but I'll ask it for you now, right? Considering the constant criticism of the government by commentators on their ability to negotiate a good deal, do you believe that had Corbyn or Starmer been in the hot seat, that they would have done a better job? And would they do better for education as well?
Well, I generally believe, and clearly, you would possibly respond by saying, because I'm a Labour councillor, I'm a Labour politician, I've been Labour all my life, that I would say that a Labour Prime Minister would have addressed the inequalities in this country. Jeremy Corbyn is a principled man. I supported Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership of the Labour Party, and I know for a fact, deep in my heart, that if Jeremy Corbyn would have been Prime Minister of this country, he would have done a far better job than the Prime Minister that we've got at the moment. Even within his own party, they're doubting his skills. I mean, he's absent. He hardly ever appears until there's a snapshot of a comment. Where is he? He's not on the ground.
Let's just move it on a little bit. Was it wise for you to travel to Pakistan during COVID-19? And how did this impact you in your role as the leader? Well, in the council.
In terms of my trip to Pakistan, I went for family reasons. It wasn't a holiday, as certain people will say. I don't need to disclose to anybody what my family reasons were. That's my personal choice. In terms of being the leader, the record shows, and the council record show, that there's virtual meetings. I chaired those specific meetings that I was responsible for. I was in daily contact with Pendle in terms of leading the COVID-19 crisis. I was in talk with national ministers in terms of COVID-19. So in terms of a virtual society, you can be anywhere. Boris Johnson was in Scotland. No, nobody questions him. He's the Prime Minister of the country.
So did your deputy leader take over the role of the leader while you were away?
No, the deputy
leader.
I was still the leader. I was still the leader.
You were still the leader.
I wasn't. The record showed that I was an active leader. I've not shirked my responsibility.
But did not Pendle was it so important, this trip? And I'll leave it at that.
Well, it was a personal family trip, and
okay.
I'm happy to leave it at that.
All right. So how long have you been a leader, by the way?
I've been leader since 2015 to 2019. And then there was a gap of 1 year when the Conservatives, by default, took back control by reinstating a councillor who'd made racist comments. but subsequently they've lost control again.
So you've had previous terms as leader as well, I take it, from this one, isn't you?
Yeah, I've had 4 years and then a gap of a year, and then this is my second term.
So during these terms, what have you done to benefit the Pakistani community? You know, British Pakistani community, who make up more than 10,000 residents within Pendle.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Pakistani community, I mean, I'm here to represent the whole community. I'm not here just to represent the Pakistani community. But being a British Pakistani, clearly I know where my roots are from and I know my community because I'm entrenched in the community. In terms of creating those opportunities for children who are growing up in this area, because one of the things that when I went to college, I wasn't blessed with a university education, but I realised that children, when they leave this area, do not tend to come back, and hence I've lobbied and brought about significant amounts of funding. And I'll give you one example, Harry Southgate. Bradfield Mills, formerly known as Bradfield Mills, now Northlight, is a £32 million project that I played a leading part in, along with other people across the council and the county council at the time when Labour was in charge. And hence, there's significant job creation there. Loamshire Industrial Estate has been expanded, double in size, will create roughly 1,500 jobs there. So that's an opportunity for the whole community, not just, I'm not here to serve one section of the community. My role as leader is to lead the whole community.
I take that on board. I absolutely take that on board. What I'm trying to say to you is that the Pakistani community, who ultimately, I think majority of the voting that when you get elected come from the Pakistani community, and they look up to you.
They don't actually.
They look up to you.
The majority of my constituents are non-Pakistani.
Okay. Well, we're talking to Councillor Mohammed Iqbal on the issues, and we're taking a short break, and we'll be right back.
बुखारे की बात आ गई दिल करदा सोटी मार के नक ते तेरा मेरा नक विंगा करदा शिवा सेठी और का कर दे मैं उधर को दो मुरा खाइयां जांदियां सी की हैंडल की मुझे तेरे कितना सोना रब ने बढ़ाया तूने मैंने आप भी भेजा कि उसे विआह करा ली वाज सानू बुला ले फिर बस और लभदा फिरना ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪਾਸਪੋਰਟ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਪੰਜਵਾਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਬੱਚਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਇਹਦਾ ਦੇਸ਼ ਚੁਗਲੀਆਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਛੇਵਾਂ ਬੱਚਾ ਖਾਣ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਥਾਣੇਦਾਰ ਲਵਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ
Welcome to the Marcus Azara Show, a brand new chat show.
Yes, we have so much entertainment for you guys, live music and exclusive interviews with all of your favourite people.
And these artists are going to be from all over the place. The artists are... Zara? The artists?
You was meant to book the artists.
You mean you not book the artists?
No, that was
Zara.
your responsibility.
I wasn't supposed to...
Anyways, guys, just make sure you tune in.
Just don't tune out. Zara.
Marcus, this was your
You were supposed to book them. Why did you book them?
Do you know, I'm so fed up with working with you.
What is that supposed to... just make sure you tune in.
Marcus!
Welcome back to the issues with me, Harry Boota. I'm here today with Councillor Mohammed Iqbal from Pendle Council, who's speaking to me on the issues. Councillor Iqbal, considering you yourself migrated to this country, well, your parents did, from what I understand now, what positive image of Pakistan have you tried to promote in Pendle with the use of arts and culture?
In terms of the use of arts and culture, I mean, just in terms of promoting Pakistan, I mean, I make a purposeful point of going to Pakistan as regularly as I can, which unfortunately isn't as often as I can because I have other commitments as well. But, you know, my blessed father is buried in Pakistan, so, you know, if nothing else, I go and visit his grave. But in terms of promoting Pakistan, you know, one of the big criticisms that I have, for example, of the Pakistani media in this country is that there's always a negative image portrayed of Pakistan. And alhamdulillah, you know, when I've previously gone to Pakistan for a holiday, I've taken my children and shown Pakistan for what its beauty is. But the fact is that we need to be working with the government of Pakistan to promote Pakistan here amongst the indigenous community, because tourism is lacking in Pakistan in a big way. And as a council, you know, we facilitate anybody that visits us from Pakistan, whether it be a politician, an artist, a cultural attaché. We work closely with the consulate in Manchester to promote Pakistan. There's a lot that can be done, but it needs an initiative, a two-way initiative. We're here ready and willing to work with the Pakistan government and the people of Pakistan, but rather than the negative criticism that Pakistan gets.
Well,
I want Pakistan to be a positive image all the time.
Well,
I want people from Pendle to go on holiday to Pakistan.
Here's your opportunity, you know, to connect directly with the consulate. You know, they're open-armed. You know, they welcome initiatives from the local councils, local communities, especially where there's a lot of indigenous people there. And I'm sure he will welcome you with open arms. I
don't think it's responsibility of the government, though. Businesses and tourism places in Pakistan should be reaching out across the world.
But the representative of the Pakistan is here in Manchester, so you can reach out to them, and then it's their job to go and do what you request of them. It is,
but I don't think it's fair to. I mean, I'm not here to criticise the government of Pakistan at all. Far from doing that. But you know, why is it that businesses in Turkey, businesses in Morocco, businesses in India make direct approaches to people living in this country to go and spend their money in those countries, go and invest in those countries? It's not down to the government. The people of Pakistan, and especially those people in those specific high-profile places, need to reach out across the world. The world is a small place now. We're a global village. It's not down to the government to do the ambassadorial rule all the time.
Okay, well, you mentioned earlier on that your father is buried in Pakistan, and may God give him the highest place in Jannah. Ameen. Speaking about burial places, you know that more and more Pakistani families are now opting to bury their relatives in the UK. With that in mind, what have you as a leader of the council done to try and grow the burial spaces available within the Muslim section of the graveyards? Because it's very, very important. As we know, that these kind of planning is future planning, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years ahead. And you need to acquire the land now for the future to come. So what, as a Pakistani yourself, and knowing what the problems are, what are you doing about securing more grounds for burial spaces?
I mean, alhamdulillah, I joined the council in 1998, and in 1999, I, along with the leader of the council at the time, who happened to be a fellow British Pakistani, created the Muslim plot in Pendle on council-owned land. Well, you're right, Harry, that 9 out of 10 people are now burying in this country, and that's good. That's a good thing. For example, my own maternal grandmother died last week, and we buried her here, despite her family from Pakistan saying bring her back to Pakistan, because she's lived here most of her life. But in terms of burial plots, Pendle currently has, and I've identified over the last 2 or 3 years, enough capacity at the moment for 8 to 10 years worth of supply. But I'm not sat on my laurels thinking, well, we've got 8 to 10 years supply, that's good enough. I'm actively still pursuing with officers to have that 20-year vision where, if I'm no longer leader of the council, if I'm no longer a councillor, what I don't want is the Muslim community in Pendle to be suffering the shortage of grave spaces. But the other thing that we've done, and people that are not familiar to Pendle are more than welcome to come and have a look, we were the first council in this country to introduce vaults in terms of our cemeteries. And even today, you go up to our cemetery, there's 30 graves already dug out in terms of vaults, ready to be buried 7 days a week. And for example, I'm dealing with a couple of deaths today in the area. Those people will be buried tomorrow. Other councils look to Pendle in terms of leadership, and in terms of our vaults, we led the way, and other councils are following. A lot of big councils, even to this day, don't provide vaults, whereas we do. So I'm proud in terms of the council, and it's not down to me individually, it's down to all my colleagues across the council and a fantastic team of officers, where we know there's a need in the Muslim community, and we've actively worked to address that, and are still working.
Well, good. I'm sure the Pakistani community will be very delighted to hear your work on that. As I said, it's a long-term vision that a lot of councils do lack, and I'm pleased to hear that you've at least got a 10-year plan and you're looking towards a 20-year, which is good. Just moving away from this and towards Brexit, can I just ask you a light-hearted question on what side of the referendum were you in 2016?
Well, me and you were
and what is your current view?
Me and you were on the opposing
now?
side. Me and you were on the opposing side of Brexit.
How do you know what side was I on?
I'm a firm Remainer. I believe that this country is best suited as a place within Europe, because as an island we rely on our friends in Europe. There are issues around immigration; those can be worked on. But I voted Remain in 2016. And if it was up to me today, I would still remain in Europe.
So, do you believe in democracy?
I absolutely believe in democracy. And in 2016, people voted to leave the European Union. But the debate's been enraging now for the last 4 years. The Conservative Party have been engrossed, and they've lost at least one prime minister through Brexit. Because what does Brexit actually mean? When you supported, for example, the Leave campaign in 2016, what were you actually campaigning for?
Are you asking me a question?
I'm asking you a question.
Me? I'll tell you what I was voting for. I was voting for the sovereignty of this country. When you've seen your sovereignty being destroyed over the last 45 years by an institution, it's an institution. The European Union was an institution. It's not democratically elected politicians out there. If you want to ask me directly what your member of European parliaments in the UK were, they were just stooges for the non-elected members who actually run the European Union. And that's why I wanted our country back to make laws for itself.
But it's really
that was the main thing.
It's refreshing for me to see Conservative Party members who were sat in the European Parliament, who now realise what they were doing, who have now actively said that Britain is best in Europe. It was an institution created by this country at the end of the day. So we're party in terms of that creation. We should be working to make sure that institution works for the people of this, in terms of
what we have to work towards, Councillor Iqbal Ratna, is to get behind the decision of the British people and make this country better for the future of our children. That's what you should be working towards.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
So you should throw your weight behind that. I think from now on, and the decision's been made by the people, and let's just respect whatever it is, whether you were for or against. But right now we have to unite. And be one.
We do, but what it needs is those people at the top of the country, the Prime Minister and his cabinet, to unite. I mean, they can't agree amongst themselves. So what hope have you and I got as being normal citizens of this country? It's down to the top politicians, and they're failing us miserably at the moment.
Oh, I'm sure they will totally disagree with what you're saying there. So, let me. One of the more serious points here, right, locally, is the unemployment problem, right? There's a huge unemployment problem in most Lancashire towns. Why is it there is no action being taken by local councils to bring back business to local towns? There is no longer any mills or factories like there were in the 70s, and the population now has good proportion of it as educated and hold. A lot of people hold degrees. Youngsters now coming out with lots of degrees, and yet degree jobs are hard to come by towns like Pendle, for example. Why? What can you do to get some very highly skilled and jobs where educated people can work?
Well, I've highlighted two projects that I'm involved in at the moment. That's the Northlight Development and Lumshire Industrial Estate, where inshallah those are coming to fruition very, very quickly, within a matter of weeks, if not months, to create those highly paid skilled jobs. But the worry that I've got at the moment is, and this is something that I'm dealing with currently, is that we have some big employers in this area who have been involved in the aerospace industry over a number of years. And sadly, because of the current crisis and the lack of government intervention on the manufacturing aerospace industry, people like Rolls-Royce, who are big employers in this area, who have highly skilled jobs that a lot of local people work for, they're finding themselves now out of work. The challenge for councils, regional government and national government is to work together to bridge that skills gap. But that can only be done by direct investment and direct lobbying of big companies. The scene at the moment is that big companies, whether that be British Airways, Rolls-Royce, any other big companies you name, big ticket companies, they're not investing. They're actually looking to reduce their employee base. And Rolls-Royce, for example, are looking to relocate to Singapore. I'm very angry at that decision by Rolls-Royce, that they should have focused, instead of over 1,000 people losing jobs locally, they should be working with the government, with the council, to leave those jobs here. But the marketplace is currently dictating, and again, it comes back to the point that there has to be a joined-up approach to address skills gaps. And, those two projects that I've talked about are still going on despite the current crisis, and I'm, inshallah, hoping that they'll come to fruition very, very soon.
Moving away to from our national to international issues, you said in the introduction that your background is from Kashmir, and your family were for Kashmiri. What's your views of the current situation in Kashmir?
I'm absolutely. It really hurts me as a Kashmiri to see what is happening to our brothers and sisters in Kashmir. But the sad reflection is that apart from the government of Pakistan, no other government in this world is prepared to stand up to India, because certain governments have economic interests. I get that. But there's a human rights issue and atrocities occurring in Kashmir every single day. Yet why is the world quiet? Is it because they're scared of India, or is it because Kashmiri lives are so cheap?
Well, why is the world quiet? Why are certain leaders quiet? What's your party leaders' views on Kashmir, for example?
Well, the party leaders' views, Jeremy Corbyn previously had said that...
No, I'm not talking about Jeremy Corbyn. We know about Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn,
it's important that we
Jeremy Corbyn, you had a motion passed in your conference last year on Kashmir, and that was under Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not talking about Jeremy Corbyn. I'm talking about Sir Keir Starmer, the leader now.
Sir Keir Starmer's position is quite clear on Kashmir. Keir Starmer's position is the one that was adopted at the party conference only a few months ago. Keir Starmer believes that the Kashmir issue has to be resolved by India and Pakistan, but
that is just a British foreign policy. Why is he speaking?
But the conference motion is quite clear, and the party leadership accepts that, both Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, that Britain has a role in playing in terms of Kashmir. Because my view is, I wasn't born then, but Britain is at fault for creating the Kashmir issue. Had the issue been resolved in 1947, you and I wouldn't be discussing the issue. But the British government, whichever government it is, whether it's Conservative or Labour... So
you agree that Britain has a huge part to play in the current crisis?
Britain has a pivotal role to play in the current crisis. And Britain, I believe, along with America, who is the so-called superpower of the world these days, both of them need to bring India and Pakistan around the table, and the Kashmiri people around the table. What can't happen is that Pakistan and India decide the future of Kashmir because of United Nations resolutions time after time which say the Kashmiri people must be given the final say.
Yes, we've heard that over and over again from every commentator has said the same thing.
The sooner the United Nations makes India adhere to that rule, the sooner this resolution and the suffering of my Kashmiri brothers and sisters will be over.
Well, let's start by addressing that issue. Why don't we the Kashmir issue? I think, if I'm right in thinking, Pendle has in the past been closely connected to the Kashmir via the Council's working group on Kashmir. In fact, I believe it was one of the first councils to adopt the Kashmir working group. Am I right in thinking? Why is it that Pendle has now distanced itself from the Kashmiri group?
The Pendle Council has not distanced itself from the Kashmiri people. We were actually the first...
No, you had these Kashmir working groups. They don't exist anymore. Why were they disbanded?
Well, if I can just answer your question. In 1995, the Kashmir Working Group was the first Kashmir Working Group set up in Pendle. Kashmir Working Group is still a functioning group. The fact is that those people that were leading the Kashmir Working Group, some of them regrettably had their own vested interests in that. And as a result of that, those people were asked to step back. That's why the Kashmir Working Group failed. It's still there on the council records as a group. And I'm open to anybody coming up, taking the reins along with me to get it functioning. But the Kashmir Working Group at Pendle was a brainchild of my Labour colleagues on the council at the time. And we organised seminars, we organised functions where we told the indigenous community about Kashmir. So if you go out and ask people in Pendle what do they know about Kashmir, they'll tell you what they know. But the work isn't just on a local level. This is an international crisis. It's not an issue, it's a crisis. But international governments, including our government at the moment, is very, very quiet.
When you have within your, within the heart the council, such as yourself, and you as a leader of the council, and you're telling me that the Kashmir Working Group is still alive within the council. Am I right in thinking that?
It's not dead.
It's not dead.
No.
So, will you work with other council leaders across Lancashire to form further Kashmir working groups in local authorities?
Well, I'm happy to lend my support to other council groups. It's not for me to sit here today and tell other council leaders how to run their council. That's their choice.
What has within the Pendle Council, what has the local Kashmir working group done in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years?
Well, in the last 5 or 10 years, for example, the Kashmir Working Group has consistently written to our Member of Parliament, who sadly, whilst he was Secretary of the Pakistan group in Parliament, has failed to speak up on the issue of Kashmir. He's a minister at the moment, and I've written to him recently, following the atrocities in Kashmir once again, to say, look, you're a minister, you need to raise it with Boris Johnson and the Foreign Secretary and speak up for the people of Kashmir. But sadly, the government is lacking in this sense, and there's only so much I can do as a local politician.
Okay, well, let me extend an invitation to you that I work closely with Raja Nijabat Hussain, who's the chairman of Jammu Kashmir Self-Determination Movement, and I will be quite happy to come to your Kashmir Working Group meeting that if you organise.
You're welcome anytime.
Well, organise one, and I will come to it.
Absolutely, no problem.
Well, we've been talking to Councillor Mohammed Iqbal, who is the leader of the council in Pendle Council. I wish to thank him from the bottom of my heart for taking part in our show today. Thank you, Mohammed Iqbal.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
The issues never seem to go away, and for as long as they're there, we'll be here. Thank you.